Well, the spars are varnished, ready for the new season. I took off the Crabber's Sickens finish and put some international varnish on instead. But when I was stripping the coating off, I could see that there was some abrasion on the bowsprit, particularly where it rubs on the forestay when the bowsprit is steeved, which I do every time I come into harbour. So I've decided that I'm going to put some leather around the bowsprit at the appropriate point to reduce wear. And it just turns out that I had some materials left over from a previous project. So let's get started with that. So, having measured up carefully from the centre of the pin and also comparing to where the abrasion appeared, the leather's going to come from here to here. And it just so happens I've got a piece of leather that will fit that. So I'm going to wrap it round and stitch it neatly across the top. So the first thing to do is to cut an appropriately sized piece from my sample. I measured the circumference of the spar using a paper strip. The leather can be stretched very slightly when wetted, so I made the piece a couple of millimetres smaller so that it will fit very tightly when stitched in place. The leather I will be using is untanned hide, approximately 2 millimetres thick, which I obtained from Classic Marine, who sell it by the square foot. I also bought sailmaker's twine and a pack of needles. 2 needles would be needed for this job, and I was glad I had a spare, as I broke one by gripping it too tightly with pliers. The leather is quite easy to work with, and I had good results from a couple of previous projects. I've put links to those in the description below. The dimensions were transferred to the leather, which I marked out using a steel rule and set square ready for cutting. I made a big mistake here by marking out with a Sharpie. I drew one line wrongly and it will never come out fully. I tried gentle sanding and solvents, which helped, but the ink really soaks into the hide. Luckily it will not end up in too prominent a position and hopefully will fade a little as the leather weathers. The leather is easily cut with a craft knife. I used a steel rule and scored the cut first rather than trying to cut all the way through in one pass to make sure I got a clean, straight edge. The next step is to make holes to stitch through. There are specialised leather making tools for doing this job much more quickly, but as it's a very infrequent task for me, I will mark and drill the holes manually. I used my navigation dividers to score a line parallel to the edge of the leather, about 3 millimetres in. I then used my Sharpie and the steel rule to make marks every 5 millimetres along the edge. Because the markings on my rule were not too clear, I marked every 1 centimetre and then moved the rule 5 millimetres to make the marks in between. I used a small hand drill with a 1 millimetre bit to make the holes, though these turned out to be rather snug for the needle, so I ended up opening them up to 2 millimetres. I sat the leather on a scrap piece of wood. My wife would not have been very pleased if I made drill holes in her cutting mat. Now the leather is ready to stitch onto the spar. The thread is waxed. I roll it between my fingers, holding it very close to the end of the thread. It will go through the eye of the needle. To lock the thread onto the needle, you take the free end, push the needle through the twine and pull it back over itself. Pull it tight. and that will lock that on so I can pull that through. That makes life much easier, stops it slipping. I've cut the leather smaller than I was intending, and I fear that it won't fit. I'm going to hope that I can gradually draw it tight, and if it doesn't, then I'm not too bothered, because I can order a new piece of leather and use this piece for the gaff. The Sharpie that I had previously marked the leather with, that's pretty much impossible to remove, so I wouldn't be unhappy to have a fresh piece of leather in this rather prominent spot. Well, the full extent of my nonsense is now clear. What I've done is I have drilled holes in the wrong edge of the leather. So it does fit round this way, but I've made holes along the other edge. What an idiot. However, I think I can retrieve the situation, because what I'm going to do is I am going to do a blanket stitch around the edge to make a decorative stitching, to make it look like I meant to do that in the first place. But if you don't tell anyone, neither will I. Here's the piece now with a decorative edge stitched on, which should cunningly conceal my error. And now I'm going to do my stitching to bring it together. I've marked the spar where I want the end of the piece of leather to come to, so I can move the leather about whilst I'm manoeuvring things, and then hopefully draw it tight in the right spot. And to start off my stitch, I have put the needles through the leather and looped the twine round twice, so that that's my starting point, and the two equalise the two threads, and they're leading off. I've chosen corset stitch for this job because I think that gives the nicest appearance. I could have used several other stitches, but what I'm doing is coming across with I've got two needles, one on each side, and coming across diagonally to the next hole up on the opposite side with each needle, and then pushing it through. If you can hear a tapping noise, it's actually the chickens tapping on the window, demanding more food. I've only just given them some treats. Now, I've drilled these holes a bit too small, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my Dremel, and I'm just going to make those holes a bit bigger, because even with pliers that's going to be really hard to get that through. With each stitch, crossing over up one hole to on the opposite side, and then easing the stitches in. Seems to be a nice tight fit. To finish this section of stitching, I drew everything up tightly, made 3 thumb knots in the twine and cut it to leave a short tail. I used a lighter to melt the wax on the cut ends to help seal the threads, and then tucked the tail down between the leather edges. You can just see it in this shot. I've made quite good progress. Happy with what's going on. The ends were getting a little bit short, so I have stopped at the exact halfway point, and I'm going to start again with another length of line to do the rest of it. It was only when I was editing this footage that I saw that I'd passed the needle through some of the fibres in the twine there, which is not good. However, it won't matter here at the start, as the twine is still able to slide when I take up the slack. I did take care not to do that during the main stitching, because it means you can't draw the twine up tight. I had to undo a stitch at a few points when I accidentally caught some of the fibres. I found the stitching very satisfying and soon got into a routine. There's a knack to passing the needle cleanly through the hole, and I found I didn't need a sailmaker's palm. Well, here's the finished article. Not actually corset stitch because it hasn't crossed over, and it's not baseball stitch either, because in baseball stitch you come up through the leather rather than down, as I've done it. But I think that will be a neat and tidy job, and it will do what I need it to do, which is to protect the wood from chafe. So overall, happy enough with that.